Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Rebecca Jarvis and I'm here with an extra special guest today, John Coyle, who you may remember a familiar face from the Olympics. He is a silver medalist. He won the silver medal, it was 1994.
That would be the Tanya and Nancy Games.
The Tanya and Nancy Games, I love that. And I first met John at the Chicago Ideas Festival, and the reason that I wanted him to come talk to us today from here on the Real Biz Couch is really because of the story that you told at the festival about how much money it actually costs to get to the Olympics. Because I think we all think of the Olympics, you can watch an Olympian, you can watch Michael Phelps and his crazy shoulders and that butterfly and think about how much work went into that, but the money that went into it is insane.
It costs a lot of money to become an Olympic athlete, depending on the sport, but even track and field where you only need shoes is expensive. And you think about some of these famous athletes, yeah, the top tier, 1 and 2, they make some money. But there's a study by Deloitte just this year, the average top 10 track and field star in the world makes less than $15,000.
Less than $15,000,
Right.
The top.
The top 10. Below the top 10 was less than a pair of shoes.
That's crazy. So they're making less money than it actually costs to even play the sport in the first place. Your story, the credit card debt that you went into in order to get there.
Right. It's probably not possible today, but as a recent graduate of Stanford, back when the banks were really giving out a lot of credit, they decided I was worth some credit risk. So I was able to get 40 credit cards.
40 credit cards.
Each with around $2,000 on them, and I used that to fund myself for 8 years. When I finished speed skating 8 years later, in 1998, I had $87,000 of revolving credit card debt.
Which is awful. Nobody wants to be an $87,000 of revolving credit card debt.
Right.
What are most people doing? Because the cost of playing in the Olympics, I actually pulled together some stats that we'll go through here in a second. And also, by the way, for everybody who's watching, you can definitely tweet me your questions at Rebecca Jarvis, or you can put the questions right here below the video here on Facebook. Let us know, because John is going to be with us here for a little bit, and I want to make sure that we get your questions in there as well. But something that was really crazy to me is just these costs. A gymnast getting to the Olympics, $120,000.
Mm-hmm.
The fencing, $300,000 to get to the Olympics. And we've heard these stories before of Olympians and their families going bankrupt,
Right.
barely making it to the games. You have your own story where, so you're at the Olympics, and what did you end up having to do?
Well, this is just before the Olympics, but in prep for training and trialing, trying to get there with very little money, to make the World Cup circuit one year, I hitchhiked through Europe and slept with families. I only had $2,000 for 2.5 months in Europe, and that included the plane flight. So my very first hitchhiking escapade was to get from Amsterdam to a World Cup in Munich. So I got picked up by a truck driver at like 7 in the evening. He woke me up at midnight, kicked me out in the middle of Germany, no idea where I was.
Did he know that you were an Olympian?
I don't know. He didn't speak any English.
So you literally got in, you could have potentially, who knows, I don't even want to think about it, terrible things could have happened before you even got to the Olympics, purely because you were out of money.
Right.
So there's no oversight? Like someone from the Olympic Committee's not like, hey, make sure you're here at this time and we want to make sure you're okay?
It's gotten a lot more professional since then. No, we were kind of on our own a lot back in the day. And we'll get to how it's changed with crowdfunding. But so, I needed to get to the World Cup, so I hitchhiked, and I got a ride, and I got dumped out in the middle of nowhere at midnight, and then it started raining, and I was freezing to death, and I marched around for a couple hours trying to stay warm, and then I eventually put on the only dry clothes I had, which was my speed skating skin suits, and then I made a huge pile of hay in a field, and then I burrowed underneath of it, and I slept there overnight with a tube in my mouth to breathe. And then when I woke up, it was actually 2 p.m. I'd slept for 10 hours, and I woke up because I felt the rumble of traffic. But as soon as I popped out of my nest wearing my bright silver and pink skin suit, the rumble stopped, because it was actually one of the world's largest farming pieces of equipment behind me about to turn me into bloody french fries.
So this all, the silver medal, everything else that followed, could have been for naught purely because of that. What was going through your head throughout all of this? Were you thinking about, oh, I have to compete and I'm nervous about that? Or was it more like, I just need to survive and get through the night?
Just survive, get through the night, like that. But the whole thing is driven by, I need to be somewhere, and if I don't compete and train, I won't make the Olympic team. So you're so driven, and you'll do anything. I mean, I didn't really worry about the credit card debt. I didn't really worry about sleeping in a field of hay. And by the way, I got up and I popped out of the nest. The guy looked at me like I was an alien. And then I went down and I hitchhiked in my skin suit. If you ever need a ride in southern Germany, silver and pink skin suit wins the day. I had choices.
Wow, good to know. What were your other options?
There was 3 cars that stopped, and I just chose the fastest looking one. They took me right to the rink. I didn't even need to change. I got right on the ice. It all worked out.
Fabulous.
Can I read a comment that I think is pretty interesting? So Molly Ryan says, Olympians should share a huge payout for their appearances every time they wear their country's colors. Dreadful how some athletes are super rich and others struggle and never get any thanks or rewards for years of hardship while bringing smiles to our faces.
Interesting point.
Sounds awesome, but it is the world of supply and demand, and the reality is it's the top 1 or 2 that get all the things.
That is, so the way that Olympians ultimately make their money, the ones who win at the top of their game, or for some reason they're standouts and brands are really interested in them, it's all about sponsorships.
Yes.
What does a sponsorship pay someone?
You know, it can vary, and this is the thing that's also changed. When I was an athlete, we had to be amateurs. We weren't allowed to take sponsorships.
So you couldn't really make anything no matter what you did.
No. So
that's really changed the world. What do you think about that? I mean, I understand the arguments on both sides of that. Obviously, you don't want to see somebody destitute who competes for your country and works so hard. I mean, it's a life's work to get there. But at the same time, brands owning Olympians, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
It's a little sketchy at times. Like, I get it, and I'm glad there's money. I'm glad to see that athletes don't have to go through what we went to.
Time. There we go. You're back.
Oh, great. Sorry about that, guys. We're going to keep with you, and so you just stick around with us, and we'll keep working through any technical difficulties. One thing I think it's interesting, if you look at the contrast between U.S. Olympians, you're all on your own, you got to figure it out, versus if you're in China,
right,
they pay for everything, but you leave your family, and you basically go and live in another person's world where you spend your entire life dedicated. I mean, you spent your whole life dedicated to this. But you got to be with your family and have, I guess you could call it, somewhat of a normal childhood. What was your childhood like?
I mean, it was normal-ish.
Did you skate all the time?
So I'll tell you a stat. You know, you hear about the 10,000 hour rule.
Yes.
So when I was 8, for some reason my dad got me involved with cycling. I did 13 century rides as an 8-year-old. That's 100 miles.
13.
How many 8-year-olds
as
in the country
an 8-year-old?
did? Yeah, how many 8-year-olds did 13 century
Your
rides?
legs are probably twice as long now. So
I got my practice early. So I was always heavily involved with sports. And my dad kept a journal actually when I was 11. And it's 55,000 miles of driving.
Wow.
Every single day there was either a practice or race, most of them out of state.
Wow.
But the man didn't sleep.
Yeah. So that's a huge, huge commitment from parents as well. Now people are not just paying for this with credit cards, which I'm sure there are those out there who are using credit cards, but they're also using sites like GoFundMe.
Yes. So there's some great new tools for athletes. They're really emergent just in the last few years. Started with Indiegogo. It was actually founded by 2 people that used to work for me, Eric Schell and Slava Rubin. Indiegogo sort of set the framework for how you do crowdfunding. And then from that, 2 sites have really spawned off specifically to fund athletes in pursuit of their dreams. GoFundMe.com and RallyMe.com. And between those 2, so there's 555 athletes in Rio. 292 of them are women, by the way, so the majority are women. Of those, at least 200, probably more, have crowdfunding sites. And they have raised in excess of $1.5 million.
Wow.
On RallyMe, the average per athlete is over 10,000. On GoFundMe, it's over 5,000. If you think about one of the main points that people are raising funds for Rio is to get their families there, that's enough. And there's some really great stories. I'm sure you've probably heard the story of the Uber driver.
Tell us about the Uber driver.
So Ellis Hill, Uber driver, his very first trip across the river into New Jersey from New York. He'd never crossed it before as an Uber driver. Speaking with this woman in his backseat, he's telling her that his son is going to do shot put in the Olympics, and she's like, well, he must be so excited to go watch, and he says, well, I can't go, I can't afford that. And she took matters into her own hands, created a GoFundMe site for him, and in 2 weeks raised $8,200, and now Ellis will be there to watch Daryl do his shot put. Really, really cool stuff.
Ellis is watching Daryl.
Yes.
Has Daryl competed yet? Do we know?
I don't believe he has.
All right. Well, good
Can I
luck,
take a
Ellis and
question
Daryl.
from Adriana McCormack? She asks, does the U.S. Olympic Committee have money for the Olympians?
Yes and no. So the U.S. Olympic Committee will, within each sport, they have a set of funds, and it differs by sport. Figure skating has lots of money. Speed skating, not so much. And in the summer,
Why is that?
The sports with the most sponsors and with the most viewers get the most money. So track and field stars, they do fine. Shot putters, probably not so much. And it all has to do with viewership and sponsorship. But that funding is all for living at the training center, usually not even for equipment. So it's just food and a place to stay and travel to big events like World Championships. But it doesn't cover anything for parents. So if you've got to get your loved ones there that have supported you all along the way, you got to do it on your own.
Which you did with credit cards.
Right.
Other people are now doing this way. What would be going through your mind? Because there's so many Olympians who have yet to compete.
Right.
What would be going through your mind right now if you're going to compete later today?
Well, I'll tell you what is on a lot of athletes' minds, and this is why crowdfunding is so great, is can I get my family here? Like, they have sacrificed so much for me, and now I'm going, and it feels a little bit self-indulgent, honestly, if they don't get to go. So removing that worry is it's one of the great things about GoFundMe or Rally Me. I spoke with Bill Carrig, who's the founder of Rally Me, yesterday, and he founded this whole thing based on Lindsay Vann. I don't know if you remember the story, but the ski jumper who wanted to get her sport in the Olympics #1, and then once she did, it was like, how do I get my family there? And so they raised tens of thousands of dollars for her. There's great stories of Jeremy Taiwo, who has raised $51,000 as a decathlete to not only train and prep, but also get his family there. But once you're there and your family's there, well, there's only one thing you worry about, and that's making it to the gold medal round.
So are there mantras that you repeat to yourself or that you repeated? Are there, among Team USA, are there things in the background, sort of, I don't know, stories that everybody shares with each other about getting ready and getting prepared?
Well, I'll tell you my favorite story from the game. So in my sport, you have to go through qualifying rounds. So you had a heat, then a semifinal, and then the gold medal round. The nervousness for the first 2 rounds is beyond belief because it's all about not screwing up. It's not about winning. It's about not screwing up and not letting your teammates down. But I'll tell you, once we got to the gold medal round, we warmed up, still nervous as all get out, and my teammate looks at me and he's like, there's nothing else we can do. We are literally as prepared as we can be. And all of that nervousness washed out of me because I realized there's nothing else I can do. I just got to go out there and give it everything I have. So I walked on the ice without a single ounce of nerves, as did my teammates, and it worked out.
On the final round?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like your glory round,
Totally.
You gotta just put it all out there
Yeah.
and do it your way, kind of.
Yeah, exactly right.
There's something nice about something being out of your control.
Exactly, that's exactly right. And in my sport, it's very similar to cycling, in that you're traveling at high speeds while balancing with a group of people trying to kill you. That's my sport. As it turns out, that's very similar to running with the bulls, which I did 2 weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So did you thought that running with the bulls felt similar? Was it a similar adrenaline rush? Was it similar physical? How did it work?
It's similar in every way. You've got a crush of people in a narrow lane, all trying to get to the same place at the same time. And I was very predictive of the movements of the pack. It was the same as a bike race, and I knew when the crash was coming, and it was a big crash. I mean, 70, 80 guys went down, got pummeled by the bulls. I ran right over top of them because I had no choice.
Wow.
But I was totally fine.
You could feel the crash coming.
Oh yeah, I can see it coming, like well in advance.
The spatial intelligence that you
Right.
picked up over the years.
Yeah.
What other questions do we have from our audience?
A lot of hellos and that sort of thing. I have a question. So a lot of you're mainly speaking about U.S. athletes. How does that compare to countries, athletes coming from other countries? Is the debt usually the same for athletes from the U.S. versus European or Asian countries, or any other countries have similar statistics to ours?
So a lot of countries, Russia included, have fully funded programs. So you essentially need no money except for maybe to get your loved ones there. Other countries are completely unfunded. So it's a smattering. What you will see on the crowdfunding sites is you see some African athletes that have no wherewithal, that have U.S. or European-based people trying to help them because they have more access to the technology and frankly wealth within their reaches versus in a rural village in Africa where there isn't really any money to be crowdfunded too. So it's very disparate by region, by locale, by funding from the national governing bodies.
What's the secret to putting together a really strong Indiegogo GoFundMe page?
I will tell you what, this is what I really like about it. It appears to be very much need-based.
I do appreciate that, yeah.
Right? So Emily Scott speed skater, on food stamps, mother in jail, father, working a job not paying enough for him to get there. Real need, right? She goes out, she does a GoFundMe site and raises $51,000 in a month, something like that. Enough to pay for all of her training and all her expenses, all that. You see some other athletes that don't have that story, and they've got a small amount, which is probably all they need, if that.
What do you think? So the sport is one thing. The cost of playing your sport is one thing. What's the extra money that you really need? I mean, nowadays it appears that a lot of these athletes, they're on social media.
Right.
They probably have publicists that they've hired at this point.
Right.
What costs are involved in that kind of thing?
Now, that can be expensive too, but if you're probably in that position to be doing that, you might have gotten money first, so there's a bit of a chicken and egg, cart and horse equation going on there. But what you need the money for, well, I can tell you that for 3 months living in Calgary back when I was skating, I ate mac and cheese, breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. It was
Is that the breakfast of champions?
We didn't know much about diet
People
back then.
nowadays, they probably are on macrobiotic,
Right, totally.
special
Like
vegan,
lean,
whatever. Yeah, exactly.
chicken
and you're just
spinach.
eating basically beans from a can, macaroni from a box.
19 cents a box. So,
19 cents a box.
Yeah, so I was paying, 57 cents a day for food.
Hey, I have a good question from Monica.
Great.
Monica Goebel asks, for the people who go to the Olympics and don't win anything, what happens afterwards? What jobs can they do if they don't get sponsors?
That's
Great question.
a great question, and it's a very unfortunate, tough answer. Most athletes are so heavily dedicated to the sport that they don't do anything else. So there's no school,
So
there's
what
no job.
happens after the fact?
Well, think about it. If you do it for a decade and you haven't gone to finish college and you haven't had a job, you're now, well, in my case, I was 30 years old when I got my first real job. Now, I was very fortunate that I skated in a time where you could still do other stuff. So I had 2 degrees by then. I had my master's degree, so I was able to get hired as a consultant.
You were going to school at the same time you were getting ready
which
for
really
the
isn't
Olympics.
possible anymore, I don't think.
So what would that person nowadays do?
Well, so think about it. Now you're 30 years old, you have no job experience, you don't have a degree, so you either have to find money to go back to school at age 30, or you have to take a not great job, or, this is more often the case, you go back to the sport because it's the one thing you know, and you become a coach, a trainer, an analyst, or you work for the national governing body. Now, of those, the last one's the only really decent one, because, I mean, let's face it, if you're a coach for a team like speed skating, you're traveling the world 7 months a year, you're away from your family, you're not staying in first class hotels, and you're not eating first class meals, no.
So even though it might look like a glamorous job,
Yeah.
what is the reality?
The reality is it's a really, really tough job that requires you to be away from home and away from your family a majority of the year.
Could we get a little clarification? So the U.S. government doesn't, or the U.S. Olympic Committee, basically any U.S. kind of governing body, doesn't have any funds for their Olympians.
They have funds for the Olympians, not for their parents.
Okay.
So they will pay for travel, food, clothing, not usually equipment for the athletes, but they don't cover any of these other incidental expenses, much less, I mean, sometimes you can get a per diem, at least when you're traveling.
And when you're getting ready to be there, the years upon years upon years of your childhood,
Right.
they're not paying for that
None
part
of that,
of it.
no.
And that wasn't always the case because of your story when you were saying how you traveled through Germany?
Yeah, I was not good enough to get funded that year. Other athletes got funded. So
there's a cutoff. That's not fair.
Yeah, that's the way it works.
Well, there's a tiered system of, so there's the people who rise to the very tippy top,
Right.
and then there's everybody else.
Right.
But he has a silver medal. Can we see that silver
Yeah,
medal?
exactly.
Yeah.
Good call. So this is the silver medal.
The granite inside was from the mountain they hollowed out in Hamar to put the ice rink in. Every Winter Olympic medal is completely different. I didn't even know this till 6 months ago. All the summers are the same. Yeah. So this is granite from Hamar, and then silver, obviously. Summer medals all look the same. Winters are completely different.
Is that true always?
Yes.
And what have you, where's the weirdest place you've worn that medal?
Oh.
And did you wear it? How long did you wear it after you won it? How long did you keep it around your neck?
Not long. I mean, this is the other thing. I don't know if you know this about the Olympics. It's probably my favorite thing about the modern Olympics.
Okay.
It's something they fixed a long time ago. So we finished our race. We got off, put our skate guards on, put our medals jackets on, walked back out, still breathing hard, and got our medals. And people are always like, what was that like? What was, and I used to lie. I lied for a decade. I'd say, oh, it was awesome. it was, the best experience. The reality was, I wasn't even mentally present.
Didn't even register.
Yeah, if you watch a video, you can see my face just go like this. I'm totally in some other place. I'm thinking about, all right, I'm going to get drug tested. If I do, it's already midnight, and I don't have to pee, and then I'm going to be here for a while, and the bar closes at 1:30, and it's a half hour from here, so I'm going to never party at the Olympics because that was the last night of the games. So I did get drug tested. I literally had 15 minutes of the games to party. But anyways, so
Okay.
I wasn't present. It's impossible to shift gears in 2 minutes to recognize that. So they fixed this. They fixed it in Beijing, and it's been fixed ever since. Right after your event, you get flowers. You do not get the medal. You have to wait 24 hours, during which period every person in the world that knows you sends you an email and tells you how amazing it is. And then you get your medal in front of 5,000 people with all the other medalists. But here's the secret part. Nobody knows this. This is the best part of the Olympics. You have 90 minutes after that to go to the USA house or your country's house. And there you gather with just your family, your friends, the coaches, and other Olympians for a small ceremony that nobody knows about. It's private. It's called the Ikos Award, IKKOS.
Ecos, what does that mean?
It's one of the first Greek winners of the Olympics way back when. And there you must give a medal to the person that helped you the most. And so you think about it, you go from the height of pride of what I've accomplished to the height of the depths of humility of I didn't get here by myself.
So who would you give your medal to?
I would have given it to my dad. But there is not a dry eye in that place. Every single one, they can't even talk. Like, it's
I'm going to cry thinking about it.
Yeah, it's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
Speaking of amazing, a really beautiful comment from Gary Goebel, who says that he's known you for over 10 years. He knew you for 10 years before he ever saw the medal, and it was not something you ever wore on your sleeve, and you were very unassuming about your tremendous accomplishment.
Well, there's a backstory to that. As Gary probably knows, I actually gave my medal to my parents and gave all my awards away, and it had nothing to do with the sport for a decade. Because I didn't make the 98 team, and I was so humiliated that I walked away from everything. So my medal sat with my parents for 10 years. I never spoke about it. I had nothing to do with it. But that actually all changed when I got asked to be the analyst for the Olympics back in 2006. And while I was there, it was my job to interview the parents of skaters. So I'm suddenly thrust back in this world I had sort of divorced myself from. And while I was there, one of the parents pulled me aside, and he said, "Hey, I want to tell you something that's really important." I said, "Okay." He said, "I just want you to know we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you." And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, "You won't remember, but 10 years ago you came to Bay City, Michigan with your silver medal. You put it around my son's neck. He was 11 years old at the time. He had never speed skated before in his life. The next day he joined the Bay City Speed Skating Club, and tomorrow he's skating for a gold medal."
That's incredible.
I just got shivers. That was amazing.
Blew my mind. Suddenly, I'm like, I wanted my medal back. I got back involved. I started having my daughter skate. Started coaching. I coached for 5 years, and it's the only reason it's what I do now. Like, I talk about this now. It never would have happened if not for Al Izakowski. And Alex, his son, is now the head coach of the U.S. Speed Skating.
Way to go, Alex.
Yeah.
What a beautiful way for it to all come full circle.
Totally. Yeah. It's a really magic moment.
You also now have focused a lot on time.
Yes.
And what does time mean for people? I know, yeah.
That
How
is a
many
really
different time
crazy
zones
watch.
are there on that watch?
There are 4,
Look at that
yes.
watch.
Where's this watch from?
Oh, I don't know. Just ordered.
Just a fun watch with lots of time zones. So one of the things that really struck me, I got to know John, as some of you have probably heard, when I first met him in Chicago at the Chicago Ideas Festival. And before I knew that you were an Olympian, I knew that you were focused on the meaning, basically, of life and time, and how to spend your time in a more valuable way.
Right.
And the idea of time passing us by so quickly.
Right. So the technical term is chronoception. This is our perception of the passing of time. And this is my life. It's my fascination. I've been studying this for 10 years, and it all started with, I mean, if you think about it, I spent a lifetime, or at least a half a lifetime, chasing less than a tenth of a second. The difference between gold and silver is less than a tenth of a second. In fact, in the 2002 games, first to second was 2 100ths in my sport. First to 10th was 33 100ths. So that's an entire lifetime spent for that much time. So
Much time.
Isn't that crazy? That's first to 10th.
And that was longer the way I clapped it.
Right. That's first to 10th. That's the gold medal heroes welcome, or being sent back to Siberia for 10 more years because you have to train for 4 more years because you got 10th place at the Olympics. Like, so that's how important moments of time can be. And as I've sort of just held that up to the light, I realize that happens every day in our lives. We have these moments that are much more meaningful than the rest of the day or the week or the month. And if you can create more of them, you actually can slow down time. You can actually change your perception of time and actually live life that's as much longer and richer than if you don't do that. Hence why I ran with the Bulls. That entire run was 45 seconds.
Wait, can I ask Kim Jones
seconds.
questions? Because I think
Yes.
it's very relevant here. She asked, do you think that you give up too much time to become an Olympian, or is it all worth it when you look back over the years?
Great question. I would call that time investment time, and it frankly shrinks to almost nothing. I mean, daily grind of practice, there's nothing to remember. There's nothing to remember. Those weeks and months go by, and then they disappear.
Do you
based
think
on
you
what you
feel
just
differently if you didn't win?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Sadly, fourth and below is a very different existence than third and above. And why the harsh cutoff at 4, I don't know. But for me, yes, that moment has now parlayed itself into multiple moments, including the moment with Al and Alex, right? That never would have happened without this talisman, because, putting my 4th place piece of paper around Alex's neck would not have worked. So it has created more time than at 8, but definitely the investment time is somewhat lost.
What's your advice to the people out there who are maybe kids or people who are aspiring to do this?
Well, you got to put in the time. There's just no question about it. Like, it does require the 10,000 hour rule of investing.
There's no shortcuts here.
There is no shortcuts. And you know what actually happens? Some of the best athletes in the world never make it because they're so good as kids. They're used to winning everything. You see these kids all the time. They all quit around 15, and then they get beat for the first time. And it's so mentally devastating that they think they're terrible. The reality is they're the most talented of anybody. There's people better than them. They just never met them before. And so these kids quit, and the kids have been 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, who are used to not always winning, they have the stomach and the wherewithal to stick it out and keep going. And so I actually think we have a turnover of the very best, often roughly around 14 to 16 years old, and that's really sad.
What do you think of all of the athletes who did not attend Rio because of the Zika fears? Can you imagine being in that situation?
I can't actually. For me, I would have done anything. Like, you could have given me the risk of the plague, and I still would have gone.
But how tough must that call have been? I would assume some of the situations, it's a husband or a wife, and they want to have kids, and it's coming up, and you can imagine the family dinner table conversation that went into that.
Yeah. I'm thinking of it from a male perspective. That's actually a very legitimate.
I just can't imagine how soul crushing it would be to have to weigh that. You know, you want to have a family and a life for the next 80 years, 30, whatever it is, beyond the Olympics.
Right.
But this is the thing that you've spent your entire life training for, and we've heard from a lot of really big time, Team USA people who have dropped out because of that.
Well, it's a Sophie's choice equation, but man, if I had to choose between that medal and my daughter, there's no choice, right? I'd always choose my daughter.
Thank God you said that. I was a little worried. You pointed.
I wanted
at the
to see where that was going. Actually, Bob Mayhew wants to know, where do you keep your medal day to day?
All right, so I have a funny story about that. I used to keep it in a sock, and there's a reason for that. So you might remember her name, Eric Heiden.
Yes.
So Eric won 5 gold medals way back in '80, and I was fortunate enough to go stay with him for a week when I was a prospective freshman at Stanford. So they actually connected me with him, and I stayed with him for a week, and he didn't live on campus. So when I got to visit him, I was there maybe a half hour, what I seemed like a polite interval, and then I asked, can I see a gold medal? And he's like, yeah, follow me. So I follow him into his bedroom, and then he's on his knees on the floor of his closet, digging around on the bottom, and then he pulls out this sock with his dangly heavy object in it, and pulls out a medal, and I'm like, why are you keeping your gold medals in socks on the floor? I hope I'm actually not giving away anything. Now that I think about it. And his answer was, nobody's ever going to look on the floor of my closet if they want to steal a gold medal. And that's pretty legit.
Now they
So
will.
where do you keep yours? On the floor of your closet?
Actually, I keep it in a sunglasses bag in a drawer in my house.
In a drawer.
Yeah.
We won't know which
We
one,
won't
though.
know which one. Exactly. I know. So, okay, now that you have all of this knowledge, having gone through all of this, if you had to go back in time and do any part of it differently, what would you have done differently?
That's a great question. Well, eventually I figured it out, but I trained with the Olympic team for 2 years. So when I graduated college, despite being full-time in school I managed to get 12th place in the world in short track speed skating that year.
Congrats.
And so I was sure I was going to go from 12th to 6th to 1st over the next 2 years and prep for the next games.
You were sure.
I was sure. Then I joined the Olympic team to actually have a coach and training and ice time and support. And I actually went from 12th to 34th to not even making the team 2 years later, skating slower than I had 10 years prior when I was 13 years old. Because the training program they put together for me was designed to fix my weaknesses, and that didn't work. I am a terrible aerobic athlete. I have no aerobic capacity.
Really?
Yeah, I have one of the lowest VO2s ever measured of an Olympic athlete. But at its inverse, I am a huge anaerobic engine. And so what I actually did is I quit the team, not the sport, trained all by myself, and I changed my approach. And I figured if I could go 15% less far, I could go 14% less fast and still win. And so everybody's skating this big wide track to handle the G-forces in the corners, which are roughly 3 Gs, so it's like a 500-pound one-legged squat from deeper than 90 degrees. So
That sounds painful.
Right? So while traveling 31 miles an hour and an 18-inch long, 1 millimeter wide blade on ice and directly at a wall. It's hard.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but
Daily workout.
to take the shorter approach, even built on those G-forces, but it required a huge burst of power for 2 to 3 seconds, which is the only thing I'm good at. So I just started diving into every corner and practiced that for a year by myself. Now you remember the margins in this sport, right? 2 100ths, gold to silver, 33 100ths. My very first race back after training by myself for 1 year to the day from the Olympic trials, I broke the U.S. record by over 5 full seconds and skated more than a second faster than the current world record.
That's awesome.
There would be an awesome movie montage about what you just described. Imagining the soundtrack.
So what went through your mind when you did that? Did you feel going into that moment like it was definite, or
No.
were you, what was going through your head?
I honestly had no idea that I was going fast. In fact, after my coach showed me the time, I was sure they miscounted the laps. So I just got off the ice and I went and watched the video replay to count how many laps I did. So I had no idea that was coming.
Do you think that's pretty common with athletes, Olympic athletes?
Yeah, well, one thing that I was in was the flow state, if you're familiar with that, or the peak performance state. So that shuts off a lot of your prefrontal cortex. So I didn't have a high level of awareness of a lot of things. I was intensely focused on the task at hand. And so I really wasn't paying attention to lap times or any of that. I was just focused on skating that track. And when you get in that state, one of the other things that's true is that it shuts off all your temporal circuits. So you actually have no idea how much time has passed. This is why we say time flew by. The more accurate description is, I actually didn't measure time. So you just have no awareness of how much time has passed. And that's a great thing. Whenever you feel that actually means you're operating in your area of strengths. So you want to do more of whatever that thing is.
When you're not feeling time.
Right.
It's good to know.
Yeah.
I don't always feel time on the job.
Right.
I don't know how much time has passed here.
Right.
What day is
It's
it?
going well.
Where am I?
Right.
What year is it?
Can I ask
I'm
a question?
confused.
Yes.
If you could give a piece of financial advice to the Olympians that are competing right now, that are going to leave, whether they're first-time Olympians and will probably be returning, or last-time Olympians and not speaking to the gold-winning, earners, but just general financial advice.
I mean, 2 things. One is do whatever it takes. Like, you'll never regret it. You will totally, people regret that which they don't do, not that which they do. So you will totally regret it if you don't pull out all the stops to get there. That said, you have amazing new avenues with GoFundMe and Rally Me and Indiegogo. These are 3 great ways, 3 great sites, and you have to choose which one fits you the best. That's 3 ways for you to raise potentially a lot of money quickly if you need it to support your dream. And that's an amazing thing.
But what about leaving the Olympics? So
After
they're
the
done
Olympics?
now.
Yeah.
Then
Wow.
you got to start paying those bills.
Yes, you do.
Otherwise,
Get a
that's not going to
job.
be so fun.
Right.
Well, actually, from a job standpoint, you talked about if you were to get on the Olympic Committee or get in that world, that's the best paying avenue for a former Olympian. But what are some other avenues that you see for former Olympians that are worthwhile to pursue?
The route I took is probably the single best if you can get it, which
Yeah.
is consulting. Consulting firms hired a 30-year-old with no experience and paid me a lot of money right out of the gates because they seek high-achieving individuals that will put in the time. I mean, they want to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week.
You also got your MBA.
Yes,
So
that helped.
while you were while you were in the Olympics, you were in the process of getting
Yes.
your MBA, and then you got it after.
Yes.
You graduated after. What are there ways of for people who have been out of education for a while, and I think this applies to anyone, not just Olympians, but what would you recommend for people who have, let's say they got a college degree or they finished high school a while ago and they want to jump back in and learn something new? What would you recommend?
Well, there's a lot of new emerging opportunities for education these days. All of these startup communities give you an amazing potential to learn stuff really quick. So all of these, like 1871 in Chicago, you're familiar with. It's a startup area. Getting involved with a startup is a great way. The guy Peter Thiel was a co-founder of.
We have his book right back here,
Okay.
0 to 1.
So
it's actually a very useful business book. He was a professor at Stanford,
So
or he was teaching a class at Stanford.
We actually went to school together. He was in the chess club.
Were you in the chess club?
I was not.
Okay.
I just watched him play a couple times. We were friends back then.
Okay.
But Peter has the Thiel Fund. I forget what it's exactly called.
Yeah.
He pays kids to not go to college and instead work in startups.
Which is a little controversial.
Yeah. But there's so many avenues. But the other is, especially if you have some Olympic credentials, your odds of getting into school are better. I mean, let's just face it. Would I have gotten into Stanford if I wasn't a national caliber speed skater? Probably not.
So basically the time to apply to your dream school is when you're competing in the Olympics.
Yeah.
Would be a great time.
Yes.
If you can find a way to fill out the application form.
Apparently, if Stanford was a country, it would rank like 7th or 8th in the amount of medals.
Oh, I believe it.
Against.
Yeah.
It's like
Really?
crazy. Yeah.
So Stanford has a crazy number of, so they
yeah,
recruit
they have
people
a
with
ton
medals.
of Olympians. Yeah.
So basically, Olympic winners should capitalize on their status.
For all the Olympic winners out there who are paying attention, you want to capitalize on it. No, but actually, something that you said earlier to me is what really resonates, and I think it's the lesson for anyone and all of us, which is you talked about when you thought you were going to shoot up to number 1, basically.
Yeah.
And you didn't. You
Yeah.
fell back because you were hanging out in a group, and you were competing in this group, and you were doing it the way everyone else was doing
Yes.
it, basically.
Right.
And to me, the lesson, the biggest takeaway is you realize that if everyone else is doing one thing and going around the track one way, you got to figure out the way you're going to go around the track. And it's got to be different. And that's what made you successful. That's what got you here.
Yes.
And you broke away. You went away from the team for a year, trained by yourself.
Actually, for 3 years.
Three
That's
years.
when I got my MBA. That's the only reason I was able to do it, because nobody was telling me where to be and when. So I was living in Chicago, or in Milwaukee, training at the Pettit Center. So here's my routine. This is kind of crazy, but I'd get up every day at 7. I'd be on the ice at 8 to 10. I would, then I did have a part-time job for 3 hours. I'd work as an engineer for 3 hours. And then I would leave my work and drive to Kellogg down in Chicago, 3-hour drive down because of traffic. Class from 6 to 9, drive back, only a 2-hour drive back. Got home at 11, and I did weights in my basement from 11 to 12, and I did that every day for 3 years.
Dedication.
Yeah.
What kept you going?
I'll tell you, this is a story I just recently actually recalled. I think I subliminated it. I don't know. About 2 months into me breaking off and training on my own, nobody wanted this to happen. Coaches, parents, all came out of the woodwork. Originally, sort of like pushing me. No, you can't leave. Like you're just about to break through. But I did it anyway. And then I got painted with the broad brush of the wild child, the non-team player. And so the national governing body was really, they were bridling against what I was doing. They didn't like it at all. And so I went to go do a training camp in Lake Placid. I drove 20 hours from Milwaukee to Lake Placid for a week training camp with my teammates. And after the first 2-hour session, the coaches came up to me and they're like, I'm sorry, but the skaters and coaches have voted and we don't want you to skate with us. You have to go home.
What did you say?
Can't sit with us.
But totally, I got voted off the island. So I got in my car in tears. I drove all the way back. But I'll tell you, every morning, that was my inspiration.
Yeah.
That was the moment that got me out of
So
bed.
what would you like to say to those people right now?
You could pull a pretty woman. You work on commission, right? Silver medal.
Well, I'll tell you, after I showed up a year later for the trials, there's nothing like success to breed welcomeness back.
It's true.
Yeah, it was.
Success is the best revenge.
It was the best revenge.
Okay, so I want to rewind 2 seconds there. So you made this call that your parents didn't agree with, your coaches didn't
parents
agree
agreed
with.
with.
Your parents agreed with,
Yes,
but
always.
friends and some of the friends and family
Right.
did not agree with. Coaches did not agree with.
Teammates did not agree with.
What was it inside of you that made you say, I have to go this way?
I had a coach growing up who produced he's amazing. Mike Walden in Detroit, Michigan. He produced 28% of all post-World War II cycling medalists, 150 national champions, 12 Olympians and 5 Olympic medals, all in a club of 70 families in Detroit, Michigan. Nobody was pulled from anywhere else. It was all local people. And what he did, what his mantra was race your strengths, design your training program for your strengths, and design around your weaknesses. Don't try to fix them.
And that's
Race
your
your
next book.
strengths.
Yeah.
And design exactly.
Race your strengths, design around your weaknesses. So I just kept hearing his voice in my head, like, all I'm doing every day is focusing on my weaknesses. This is exactly what Mike taught me not to do. I was successful training on my own, following Mike's advice. So I'm just going to do what Mike said. And I just did that. And then I designed a new approach based on what I'm good at. Because I'm just a terrible aerobic athlete, I really am.
I can't even. Don't say things like that.
I'm actually terrible at
You're an
almost every
Olympian.
sport.
Come on.
I'm terrible at every
If
sport.
and I'm a terrible journalist.
No, you're good.
She cracks herself up.
Yeah. What other questions do we have from people? I want to make sure we're answering.
There was an
people's
interesting
questions.
question by Bob Mayhew again. Speaking of finances, can you talk about the tax that Olympic athletes pay on the medals they win?
So that's an interesting question. You do. I don't know if the figures are the same, but it used to be $5,000 for bronze, $10,000 for silver, $15,000 for gold. Maybe it's more now.
You
Didn't
pay
you
for
say
your medal.
15,000
you.
was how much?
They give you.
Yeah. So
Oh, right. That's what they give you, and then you pay taxes on those earnings
in
as bonus
in
income.
theory, hopefully
Yeah.
there's nobody from the IRS listening, but I never
I think
paid
there's a
any
limit.
taxes.
I think there's a statute of limitations
Yes,
on that.
I never paid any taxes.
But ultimately, because it's treated like bonus income,
Right.
I think,
Yeah.
by the IRS, so you do pay the taxes
It's
on
so
it.
funny.
What do you think about that?
You know how you get your Social Security statement every year and it
Yeah.
shows you how much you made each year? So like
was that a big year for you? 94?
well, so it was like 0, 0, 0, 10,000. And then I started working after that, and so it was like, 5,000, 6,000, 5,000, and then 0 again, and then making a lot of money as a consultant. But it's so funny to see those zeros.
Yeah.
It's
The life
crazy.
of an Olympian.
Yeah.
And now you
Just
see
living out of a
zeros at
duffel
the
bag.
end.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Let's take one last question from William Quinn. What are the top 2 actions the U.S. can take to help future generations of Olympic caliber athletes?
Top 2 actions that
The U.S. can take to
US
help
can take.
Olympians,
Well, I think
right?
Yeah,
Future Olympians.
I've been talking to some of the folks at the USOC, and they recognize that funding is a huge problem, and they also recognize that they are not currently actively involved with these crowdfunding sites. So I think that will be happening.
And I think also, if that happens, it's a good thing because some people question the legitimacy of
Right.
these sites. It's not the sites themselves, but we know that there have been bad actors in the past who have
Sure.
gone on them. And how do you trust, as a person who's giving your money, that it really is an Olympic athlete?
Yeah, so I think that's one thing they can do. The other thing is, and this is probably a whole nother interview sometime, but athletes are not prepared for the end of their career. And the metaphor I would make is it's exactly like a divorce. It's like a girlfriend-boyfriend breakup. Because treat the sport as a person, it is everything to you. It is what you do every day, it's everything you think about. It is the center point of your life. And then, this is the worst part, this is sort of like, now the girlfriend breaks up with you, but she still wants you involved. She wants you to see the parade of new suitors that are faster, stronger, smarter than you. She wants you to play coach and be peripherally involved in her world. And that is the hardest thing. Almost every athlete goes through a very significant depressive bout when that's over, because it's everything they know and now it's over. And what do they do now? And there needs to be support for that transition to help athletes find that new meaning, that new purpose, that new way of being, separate from the thing that kept them going for 10, 15, 20 years. So that would be my answer.
Great stuff. John Coyle, thank you so much
Thank you for having
joining
me.
us.
Yeah, great fun.
And thank you so much to all of you for joining us for Real Biz Live. We really appreciate it. Remember, there's a brand new episode of Real Biz coming out on Thursday with Sally Krawcheck. She is an agent of change in her own right. She has been called, I think it was the People's Analyst, top analyst on Wall Street, former Bank of America, former Citigroup. fired. We talk about that, and her new company is all about investing and how women can invest. So it's a great interview coming up on RealBiz. You can find that coming up this Thursday. You can find it at youtube.com/RealBiz. Of course, we're going to put something out here on Facebook, and you can find it on abcnews.com and Apple TV. And follow us right here on Facebook for more. Really appreciate all of you joining us. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Bye.